the reality of our job over there was to make sure that when it was the most important call, it went through. And as Tim mentioned, sometimes that important call is a medevac. The difference between seconds mean lives in those scenarios. And some people can carry that and kind of be very aware of that and make it very personal. That worked really well for me. And some people need to kind of avoid it at the same time. But at least for me, I kind of went to work every day knowing that what we did mattered.
All right, welcome. I am Jerry Black. With me today is my fellow misfit, Tim Stevens. And we have a special guest with us today as well, Michael Maice. And today we're going to talk to Michael about his career in the military and how that's shaped his career in the corporate world, and hopefully help some of our listeners who are either making that transition or have made that transition and could use some assistance. But before we get into that, I'm going to do a little bit of open source comedy. So, in the IT world, we get a lot of questions we don't like. Like, can you help me with? And we know that's 5 hours of work. Did you talk to QA? Well, that project's over. Are you aware of? And it's something that happened like 2 minutes ago. When this one's interesting because it's kind of like watching someone plant a mine right in front of you, then take 10 steps back and go, come here, it'll be fun. But our least favorite question of all is, what do you do? This is a question that all IT people hate. I used to answer this in one of two ways, depending on who I was talking to. If you're in IT, I would say, I'd make all non-human communication travel from A to B with as little loss as possible, as close to the speed of light as I can. And they would say, oh, you're a network guy. But if you were not in IT, I would say I make the internets and the clouds. And then they would say, oh, can you help me with my iPhone? So as an IT professional with 25 years experience as a programmer, as a network engineer, and as a consultant, I would recommend these days that you just respond the way that I do. You just say, I'm a plumber and I just got off a job. They will leave you alone for the rest of the night. All right. Well, welcome, Michael Maice. He is the Chief Technology Officer at Archon Products. Prior to Archon, Michael spent 20 years in the U.S. Army as a Chief Warrant Officer and the Chief Technology Officer of the Joint Communication Support Element. He was also the CIO for a ruggedized hardware manufacturer. Michael has a mission-first perspective, which I think is a really cool way to say that. And he understands the challenges and the missions that customers face. Michael has a daughter. He lives in Tampa, Florida, and he enjoys golf, great food, and the University of Miami football. Although you wouldn't guess that based on his hoodie today, wearing the Tampa. But welcome, Michael.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jerry. Yeah, we don't get a lot of cold days down here, so you got to get your hoodie time in when you can down here in Florida. So I got the AC turned down low since the 100 degrees outside, and getting some hoodie time in.
Got it. Yeah,
you don't know anything about that over here in Phoenix. There's no hoodie time.
I don't know about you. I have hoodie time at my house all the time because I have a wife and daughter that live with me, and they crank the AC. It's 66 in my house when it's 120 outside.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Go back to your electric bill.
Yes, as do I. I'm supporting SRP, putting those people's children through college, as far as I could tell. All right. Well, Michael, one of the first things I wanted to wanted to ask you about was really that transition from military life to the corporate world, the military professional side of the world to the corporate world, and just your insights there and where you could take us.
Yeah, absolutely, Jerry. It's that transition is an interesting thing, especially kind of as a retiree, right? So, I was in the Army for 21 years. I went to the Army straight out of high school, it's the only adult job I ever actually had, so as you're kind of getting towards the end of that career, you're like, man, I got to go out and find a job. And what you realize real quick is, it's what definitely matters, who matters. But you find out real quick, sometimes the grass isn't really greener on the other side. It's really just different grass, right? And it's when I talk to people about that, it's really more about expectation management, because there's a complete difference between what corporate America is looking for and what corporate America cares out of an individual versus what the Army does. And there's definitely a skill set to learning how to transition the skills that you learned in your military career, obviously, to corporate culture kind of as a whole. And for me, I always tell people the most important thing that you have when you walk away from your time in the military is a network of individuals who come from kind of a like-minded set of experiences. And when you get out into corporate America, you're going to talk to, managers and leadership and coworkers who have no idea what you spent the past few years of your life doing. And it in the military really is its own subculture. So by having those connections, people that have already transitioned, people that have gone into different roles, leveraging those people and really leaning on them, especially the ones that you trust, and having hard discussions sometimes, as an IT professional, I meet a lot of people that are transitioning. I'm like, hey, what do you guys want to do when you get out of the Army? And they're like, I want to be a sales engineer. And I'm like, all right, cool. What does that mean to you? And what you'll find is what you see kind of from in the military while you're looking out at industry and seeing what these people do. You only get one side of that lens. You very rarely see all the back end support and kind of all the corporate side of the house that happens, that you'll never have insight to unless you're really asking people and talking to people about what that job means and what they go through kind of every single day.
And does the military offer kind of support in that realm, or is it more, hey, kind of good luck?
Yeah, so in the case of the Army, the Army does have a Soldier for Life program, which is designed and hosted by the VA to help soldiers kind of transition through. But one of the, like any program, if you make a program for every job in the world, it ends up kind of being, a little broad in nature, right? So like a good example, they'll teach you how to negotiate salary, right? But the way you negotiate salary as a plumber, to your point earlier, or as a IT professional, or as a salesperson, as an example, those are all different games, right? Because as in my case, where I'm very close to the sales teams, you have all these concepts of like variable compensation, right? Pay bands, like all of these things that in the military, it was really easy to figure out what I was getting paid, right? I went on Google pay scale for that year, found my rank, how long I'd been in, and it told the whole world exactly what my paycheck was going to be.
Yeah.
As we all know, that's not a life in corporate America, right? It's learning how to kind of negotiate and talk through the roles of those positions. And the Soldier for Life program does a lot of really good things for soldiers transitioning, especially with understanding your benefits and things that are out there for you to leverage through your transition process and afterwards. But the one thing that I'm glad to see today people are taking much more advantage of is actually the skills bridge programs, right? The ability to give a service member transitioning in their last 6 months or so of active duty time, the ability to go do an internship with industry and roles or in companies that interest them, to help them start to learn, and shape some of those questions they're going to ask as they go through their transition process, eventually finding, whatever their next profession becomes after that.
And a couple of questions there. So like, so I didn't serve in the military. I came straight out of college and went to work. And one of the weird things was you realize how little you know about the corporate world just from college. And I just day one, you kind of went from this, oh, I got my bachelor's degree and I, look at me. And then you go to a corporate office, you're like, I don't understand how to make the copy machine work. And where's the coffee and all this weird stuff you just don't even think about. Is the same feel when you get out of the military, that you sort of thrust into this world of the unknown, or no, you kind of have a good sense around you?
Yeah. So Jerry, it's kind of weird. My answer to that's kind of weird because the answer is both, in my opinion. So as an example, you have in the military, you have no understanding of why corporations make decisions the way they do at any given time, right? I didn't have to go worry. I didn't have to go to my higher headquarters and have a negotiation about some project I wanted to do that was tied to a credit line through a bank that we would have to negotiate on, right? Like
Sure.
that, I didn't have to go find investment money as an example in the military. I mean, I did in its own way,
Yeah.
but there's like a whole kind of financial side of the world that's just a very different that you get exposed to kind of in corporate America, especially as you move farther and farther up the ladder, obviously. What's interesting, though, is that in the military, one of the skills that you do get that people don't always realize they have is over your career, you end up working at multiple echelons of the military, right? And the information needed that drive all the decision making and kind of the delegation that happens around that, it actually gives you a really good idea of kind of progressing through your corporate journey as well, right? Because the things the things a network engineer is worried about in a corporate company is very different than what the manager worries about, or the director, or the VP, or the executive teams worry about. And you, in the military, you actually kind of have that progression happen for you automatically over your time as you go through, right? And that's one of those skills where you can truly translate into your positions as you cross over. But soldiers, service members have a hard time doing that because they don't even know that that's a thing yet. That's an example.
I see. Got it. Yeah.
Another good example is when we talk about, especially for people coming into like the federal contracting world, is the thing that shocked me about industry is once I got into industry, you realize how little industry knows about the federal government as well. And there's certainly pockets of excellence, but as somebody that's never been in the machine, the way acquisitions happens in the military is a whole nother animal than the way it happens in corporate America, right? So you do get exposed to these skill sets. You bring these skills that just seem second nature to most people transitioning, but it's actually valuable to a company if they can be explained and kind of portrayed correctly.
That's really interesting. Okay. All right. All right. So now speaking of kind of the difference between the two, and I'm really intrigued by this, but the technologies that you learned in the military versus once you got into the corporate world, and even now today, the technologies that you see in the corporate world, how different are they, and how different are they in the, I kind of always relate things back to networking because that was like kind of where I made my bones on the technology side of the world. Like how different is even just the architecture, the structure, the way you think about things in the military versus the corporate world, and then how can you translate what you do know from the military into the corporate world, and make things so that transition is easier as a professional.
Yeah, so I think during Tim and I's time on active duty, we kind of caught the curve where the lines between military technology and frankly commercial technology have really now started to blur, especially in the IT space. 30, 40 years ago, the military was building their own computers and doing all this really special stuff that was very specific to the military. But as they figured out pretty quickly, as the IT and technology boom happened through the early 2000s, the industry is just better at innovating when it comes to IT infrastructure. The biggest difference that you see, though, is the application of those technologies and how they're applied. So I used to crack jokes all the time and say things, like, hey guys, OSPF works the same in the tactical network as it does in the garrison network, as it does for, pick your company that runs OSPF, right? OSPF is OSPF. It's governed by a set of laws. But the reason and the way you implement OSPF is going to be implemented very differently based off of where you're implementing it at. So, and that applies to all technology in the space, right? And if you think about just the purpose of technology in the two environments, they're completely different as well. In the commercial sector, your technology is a business driving system, right? It drives the success of businesses with the purpose usually of making money. And there's nothing wrong with that. In the case of the military, it's a very different game, right? Because your business outcomes are no longer profitability. Your business outcomes are strategic objectives on a battlefield, right? And that battlefield creates a whole bunch of things that nobody in industry or in the commercial industry typically would have to worry about. And an example of that is, what does edge mean to you? We used to have this discussion all the time. When if I go to a bank and I'm like, talk to me about the edge of the network, they're going to talk to you about some branch office they have with air conditioner and like all these great things. You talk to somebody in the Army today, they're going to tell you the edge of the network is the actual warfighter. It's the guy on the ground. That shooter or that personnel on the ground becomes a sensor in their own right. They have compute collecting information on the battlefield and having to relay it back through echelons of infrastructure, right? So like I said before, it's not that the technology is truly different. It's that the implementation of the technology and why you do it changes significantly.
And so do you think then that in translating that, so when you're coming out of the military, you were a network guy, let's say, then is it if you gave that perspective to the guy or gal that's transferring out, that, hey, when people say the edge, look at it this way. It used to be this, now it's that. Like, think about business outcomes like you used to think about the soldier on the battlefield. Think about is that able to, you think, maybe draw those worlds a little bit better together and help them translate that not only in a resume, but also just in how they communicate to business professionals?
Yeah, and I think it starts. I was blessed. I had really great mentors throughout my career that taught me really good lessons at the right time of my career too. And I think I was lucky in the sense that very early I was taught that, like, I am not actually in the technology business, right? I am in the people business and the outcome business. And technology is just the tool that I specialize in that drives those. And I started thinking like that very early in my career because people honestly pounded it into my head, no matter whether I wanted to listen or not. So, with that, I think as especially as young leaders, as managers, as first line supervisors in the military, whether that's an enlisted person, whether that's a senior warrant officer talking to a junior warrant officer, a senior O grade talking to a junior O grade, or any kind of relationship between that, I think if we continue to kind of get people to talk in a language of outcomes and capability, right? Those discussions to correlate as you transition start to become a lot simpler, right? Because now I can look at a job posting and read an overview of a company and understand what that company cares about. I can now write my resume around outcomes that are relevant to that company.
So what one of the questions that I had that was kind of adjacent to this was sort of I maybe dig on deeper. What basic skills do you wish, not necessarily military versus corporate, but just in general, where do you think IT people lack when it comes to just sort of basic skills or things you wish they had more of?
I think
kind of a loaded question.
That's a loaded question. I think as a general statement, I think IT people are some of the most creative and brilliant people in the world when they have a problem in front of them, with figuring out ways to solve them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think for all the resources we use that make us good at that, historically speaking, we have not spent a lot of time developing our soft skills and how we communicate with people.
Yeah.
And, as I kind of mentioned before, when I think about, and I have to go talk to the CEO as an example, as a CTO, I can't go talk to him about OSPF. He's going to be like, Mike, I don't give a damn what you're telling me right now, right? He's going to look at me like I'm crazy. To a certain extent, he cares about, 4 or 5 things that are important to him. And it's my job to take technology and translate that to him in a way that matters to him to drive the outcomes that I'm trying to create as a CTO. the thing that I wish somebody would have taught me when I was much younger was that kind of art and that craft. Because when I was younger and I was first a senior engineer, even for a large part of the time that Tim and I were working together, it was, I would walk in the room and look at the commander and be like, hey, sir, like, we can't do this because OSPF is going to break, blah, 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 right? And he would look at me like he's like, I worked for a guy who was very technical at this time, but he would look at me and go, hey, I can't go tell the infantry commander about OSPF. So why do I care? And every time I went and talked to him, he would beat that into my head. And, at the beginning of the deployment, I'm talking about OSPF. And by the end of the deployment, what I found myself is I'm talking about, sustainment and the ability to maneuver across a battlefield. And, all these topics that, while as a comms guy, my team may not have directly cared about, the people I was talking to who were making the decisions and allowing us to do what we needed to do, it was what they cared about. And I think that soft skill of understanding that, communication as an IT professional is in all directions. It's downwards if you're a management person, it's upwards, it's into different kind of skill sets. And the things that a finance guy is going to be excited about, you have to learn to talk to them in their languages. Same thing with the operations team. You have to talk to the operations team in an operations-based language. Same with the CEO, and kind of working through there. So, I think if as we continue to kind of talk about outcomes and business goals or operational goals for talking to the military, the more we think about that and the more we think about how we communicate to people, that skill of rewriting your skill set to meet the commercial space becomes a lot easier for everybody over time, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think the impetus of one of the jokes that I've told in the past is the same one. It's kind of the plumber one that I told, is really that, people say, oh, what do you do? And it really is just one of those communication things that as IT people, one, anybody talking to us is generally kind of an exciting moment anyways. And so we're like, oh, and you get all excited about telling them all the details of your job. And like the person, all they really wanted to know is, you look like a nerd. Can you help me with my phone? And so it really is that kind of what is almost like, what is it that they're asking? I think a lot of the time we misinterpret as IT professionals, we misinterpret what is being asked of us. And so we immediately go into what we think they're asking, and we don't take a moment to really translate that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I got two really good pieces of advice that I when people talk to me about going into IT, I love to share these two pieces of advice. The first one, my first mentor in the military, a gentleman named George Castles, was at the time the smartest IT person I've ever met in my life, and the guy really was brilliant. But we were sitting down at lunch one day in Afghanistan, and he goes, hey Mike, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I was probably 19 at the time, and I was like, I want to be a CCIE. I want to be the most technical network engineer in the world. And he kind of looked at me and he goes, you have the opportunity to have a really successful career being the most technical guy in every room you walk in. And he goes, but if you look at the industry, what you're going to notice, the technical people that have the most upside in their career path are the technical people that can communicate what they do to everybody. And somebody told me that at 19 years old, and I had no clue. I can remember being 19 and be like, yeah, chief, whatever, stupid advice, thanks. And, I got 10, 15, about 10 years in my career, and it kind of clicked one day. It was like, oh, like my success isn't driven around my ability to be the most technical person in the room. My success is the ability to correlate these super technical concepts into things that everybody in the room can understand. And that was a moment in my career where really it changed my entire career path once I kind of understood that. And the second piece of advice that he gave me really early in my career about engineers and technical people in general, he goes, if you put two engineers in a room and you give them a problem and tell them each to come up with a solution, they'll come up with two different solutions. If you ask them which solution is better, they'll compare their solutions to the other engineer's solutions. They'll almost never compare each solution to the problem and determine which one truly solves the problem better. And as I kind of progressed and became more senior, you get in the room now with all the smart people and you watch them, they'll argue about their solutions with each other a lot of times instead of arguing and focusing on actually solving the problem and being able to kind of bring that back and bring these teams of multidiscipline teams back to, hey guys, we're focused on doing what's right for the problem, right? Changes the dynamic of all those meetings and all those type of scenarios you it goes to. And those are two of the best pieces of advice that I got 25 years ago that I still literally lean on to this day.
Those
Yeah,
are awesome, man.
Let's unpack that. Hold on a second. Let's unpack that second one, Maice, real quick. Hold on. So the two engineers would you say, is that ego? Is that fear of being undermined? Why do you think that element of just competition between the two about their solutions, even though the problem's going to get solved, and not necessarily comparing their solution to, how effectively it's going to solve the problem, but just competing with each other? What is the source of that kind of competition?
Yeah, and Tim, I don't actually think I don't think it's truly a competition thing. I don't think it's ego necessarily either. At least in a negative way when it comes to ego. I think when you look at an engineer or even a network engineer, pick your flavor, even a developer, whatever the case may be, and you ask them to solve a problem, they're going to solve it the best way that they know how. And oftentimes we are kind of limited by our experiences, right? We only know what we know, and somebody else who has different experiences may know different things. And what usually ends up happening is it's not so much that they're comparing their solution to each other. What they're really doing is taking their solution and their outcome and comparing it to their experiences that they have. And then they're kind of debating back and forth based off of what they know at the time. Does that make sense? Kind of.
Yeah.
So yeah. If you go into it with the idea of I know what I know, but there's things I don't, it makes it a much more collaborative experience. But as we know, kind of engineers in general, especially as they become more confident in their position, that willingness and openness to be exposed to other people's knowledge and other people's experiences sometimes minimizes, specifically in the problem solving space, right? Because it's kind of like that old adage, like if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. But in a weird way, most engineers truly want to be the smartest person in the room about whatever their skills.
Yeah, for sure. And they'll die on that hill a lot of the time.
Some of them, yeah, absolutely.
And it really is. You could see it torpedo their career because they'll, the emotions start to rise up, and we're not a lot of the time in IT. We're not only are we not great at soft skills, but we haven't done a lot of that sort of introspection where we're able to keep our emotions in check. I have always found that generally people out of the military are better at that. I would assume mostly because of the situations that you faced are much more critical than the whether or not we go with one network architecture versus another. Can I just say the comment, I was 19 years old and having lunch in Afghanistan, to me struck me as just like that's a crazy thing to hear someone say. It's just one of those things. Another one of those parts of the military background that you just don't, as a corporate, computer nerd like myself, that would never enter into my lexicon. So, all right, well, let's jump. I think that's great. I'm gonna take that to heart, Michael. That's grery advice. Because I know I'm guilty of that. And I'm these days I'm a project manager, and I really think taking that mindset as a project manager is going to be really helpful. So thank you. Let's transition a little bit into the differences in leadership, and sort of taking those leadership roles in the military versus the corporate world, and the difference in how, I guess, maybe how you're taught leadership, and just what you see in the world when it comes to leadership. What advice you might have to people either side of that equation?
Yeah, so the in the case of the military specifically, you've got a couple kind of dynamics happening in the kind of the leadership space. One, obviously, you have this whole concept of rank, which gives people a directive authority over others, no matter whether honestly how you feel about the person that has that authority, honestly. Obviously in the civilian world, that's not a thing, at least not from a legally binding standpoint. I mean, legitimately in the military, if you're given a direct order and you choose not to follow it, it's a prison sentence. It's not you get fired from the military, right? So you do have this directive authority, but the reality of leadership is that directive authority does not make you obviously a leader. And in the case of the military, at least, the military does put a pretty good focus on the development of the people that work for you. Now, I'm not saying it's always the most implemented. We can have debates on how, the practicality of how it's approached. But the biggest difference is in the military, the Army sends you the people that are going to work for you. You don't really get a vote. There's no interview process in most places. They're just going to send you somebody, then they're going to tell you, hey, this person is your new IT manager. And you don't get to send them back. You don't get to fire them, right? So you kind of get two options at that point. You can minimize them and, do their work for them, or you lead them, try to grow them and mentor them and do what, in my opinion, should be being done. I think when you talk to people like Tim, who I'll use as an example I served with, and quite a few other people, the weird thing about leadership is it's super hard and also really easy at the same time, right? Because it's really hard in the sense that you have to kind of pour your heart and soul, and you have to invest yourself into it, and it comes with uncomfortable discussions. It comes with terrible experiences, but it also comes with a lot of positivity and great things that come through it. But you have to kind of invest. You have to invest in being a leader. You can't just do it sometimes. But what it means to be a leader is really simple. It really is influencing people in general in a positive manner. And then, outside of that, it's really just putting people first. And that doesn't mean, being sympathetic towards everything and every individual in every situation, but it does mean being empathetic towards every individual in every situation. Because we've all made mistakes. We've all done things we wish we didn't do. Most of us know when we do something wrong, we feel pretty crappy about it when it happens. We don't need our quote unquote leader pounding us in the dirt for how terrible we are, right? We need them to be empathetic and help recover us, right? Hold us accountable, but help recover and fix and make sure things don't happen again. I think in corporate America, one of the things is that I don't think there's an onus on leadership. And as a whole, I don't necessarily believe there's an onus on development of people either. And every company has different cultures, different personalities, and that's certainly not in across the board. It's kind of an observation, just being out and watching people at multiple companies and kind of their different cultures and how they approach. I think more times than not, when we go to hire somebody, we want to hire the person that fills the job role in that exact moment, right? And we tend not to, we'll pass over the guy or girl that may have one skill set that's not developed the way that we want it to. Right. And they may not be the best hire on day zero, but we'll pass them over because of that. But in reality is if you grew that one skill, that person now may become significantly higher performing than the person you did hire. Just it may have taken an extra couple of weeks to get there. And, every company has their own approach to how they handle that and kind of that balance that they want to maintain. But I am of the belief that as in my role as a CTO, having folks that work for me is that my number one job is to make sure all of my direct reports can take my job whenever I decide to do something next, right? And I expect them and their teams to also make sure that their replacements on the team today. I don't want to go hire from outside my replacement, right? I want one of the guys or girls who've earned that position, who've grown this company, who've helped us grow and become what we are as a company. That's their job to take next, not somebody from the outside. And if I don't have somebody qualified to fill that position, that's a failure on me as a leader, not on the team working for me.